Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you virtually. I'm in Ottawa, and it was raining at lunch, so I hope that for you the weather is great. I will be the T1 family file representative for today. The T1 family file contains detailed income information that you might already have used in some of your projects, but there might still be some mystery around the dataset. So today, I'd like to give you a little bit more context to this database at Statistics Canada. The goal is for you to understand some of the strength of the database and be more comfortable with using the data. The type of information in this presentation is at helping you with choosing the source of information relevant for your projects, as well as understanding the data being used. Please feel free to take advantage of this opportunity to ask questions regarding TIFF. You may post your questions in the chat or interrupt me as I speak. You can unmute yourself and ask your question, or wait at the end of the presentation if you have questions. So today we'll start with a little bit of background information about the TIFF that includes a few points about data security, which is very important at Statistics Canada. The main aspect of the TIFF that will be covered are the population of interest and the geographical attributes available on the file, the content and usage of that database, including low-income lines, which is something that users are very fond of. Also cover other income data sources available at Statistics Canada to help you choose the best source of information when it comes time to do that. I will be covering only the main aspects, but I might be able to answer questions about other data sets if you have any, but I'm limited in that sense. There are multiple ways to access the data at Statistics Canada, and I'll give you a little bit more information about them. And since the TIFF is undergoing a major redesign right now, I will take a few minutes to share with you the current developments. So without further ado, let's dig in. So the mandate of T1 family file is currently to release income data at the individual and family level for several geographies with a focus on the level of geography. So this is really a strength of the T1 family file, and I will go over that a little later in the presentation as I mentioned earlier. The first year of TIFF data was, by the first time TIFF data was available is in 1982. At the beginning, the focus was on individual data at the aggregate level, always at the aggregate level. Starting in the mid-1990s, the family information was retroactively included in the dataset. But before 2000, there were lots of improvement at the methodological improvement to the family. And so there were more stability after 2000 in reference year. The major redesign that is currently undergoing will have significant impact on the data starting with reference year 2024. I'll go over that in a little bit more towards the end, but if you have more questions, we're closer to being ready to release than we were a year ago, so I could probably answer questions around that. This will allow to ensure that the T1 family file data continues to be available to data users and is of high quality and maybe more precise. At Statistics Canada, data security is very important, and even more because the T1 family file is based on tax data, which is very sensitive. There are several security measures that are in place to ensure confidentiality, and these measures apply to all microdata sets at Statistics Canada. So the main aspects that ensure confidentiality is a highly secured and closed environment managed by security groups. And so access to microdata is granted only to employees who have approved usage, either for a research project or for various surveys to add income data to their datasets. The released data is always aggregated or always vetted for confidentiality before it becomes public. That means that data will be aggregated to ensure that no one can be identified. There are suppression in the data sets to ensure that a data cell is not released if there are too few people. So there are various measures that can be taken to ensure confidentiality, and Statistics Canada ensures of that. So I just touched on some context of the TIFF. So now it's time to actually go into more detailed about the actual data sets. One of the big strengths of the TIF is the size of population included in the dataset. So here in that slide, it kind of shows how the population is built on the T1 family file. I mentioned that we are using tax data, and the T1 family file is based on the T1 personal income tax return that is filled early in after the reference year is over. So for reference year 2024, we would talk about probably March, April. Sometime it can go up to June. And all of us would have filed their taxes if you have to file them in Canada. But it also combines the T1 data to T4 data on wages and salaries and to the Canada Child Benefit file. So we have the main T1 tax filers. I think those numbers are 2021 numbers. So we have 31.2 million tax filers in TIF world. Among those, there are 3.7 million beneficiary according to our data set. And with the CCB data, we are able to add about 7.5 million imputed children. There are 3.4 million filers that are also children and were associated to tax filers. The other bits that we are able to add is imputed spouse, who are people who are actually not who haven't filed their taxes. They are not children, but we know that they exist because of their spouse who filed their taxes and declare or report their spouse on their tax form. And so on TIF, the unit of analysis is individual. We also have another unit of analysis, which is census family units. So I'll be going into more details with that a little later. But I will mention that even though we are based on tax filers and the tax form needs to be filled in depending on who you are towards the end of the fiscal year or in June, the T1 family file could include people who have filed their taxes up to December 31st following the reference year. The people included in the data set, the population that is included in the release corresponds to people who have a mailing address in Canada, which is about 39 million in 2023. However, there are some specific custom requests that could include people outside of Canada, but this is very customized work that's done. So that's usually not what people are looking for. So I mentioned that there are multiple types two types of unit of analysis, one of them being the census family units. When we release at the family level, usually we will include census family, which are couple family and lone parent family, and persons not in census family. So it is important to make the distinction between a census family and other various units of analysis that are available at Statistics Canada. Using different units of analysis could lead to misleading analytical conclusions. So here in that diagram, it shows an oversimplification, but it kind of gives a good idea of the difference between census family, economic family, and households. A census family is the smallest unit in that context. So this is my blue circle. To create and that would correspond to couples, so two spouses living together with or without their child, or children, and persons in lone parent family. Now, it would include people who are not in census family. Other people not in census family would be only in the yellow or green portion in the context of census family. If we look at economic family, this would be the yellow circle with the blue circle. So any people who are blood related or are legally related to another person would be included in an economic family. So for example, if you have Joe and Mary live together, they are a couple, but Joe's parents live with them, well, that would be considered an economic family. Joe, Mary, and Joe's parent. This is an economic family. And then if you are everyone who lives in the same dwelling together, then this is what we call a household at Statistics Canada. So a census family does not take into account other related or non-related person living in their dwelling. On TIFF, census family are the largest unit of analysis available. In other words, multi-generational households are not identified on TIFF, and unrelated single roommates would be considered to be persons not in census family. Some other data set might expand their universe to including economic family and households, and the choice of unit of analysis will depend on the analytical question, goal, or project, and or availability in the data set. So again, TIFF has to limit its universe to census family and connect and it cannot respond to questions related to households or economic family. The TIFF data source, as I mentioned, is tax data. And on the tax data, we cannot identify relationship past children and parents or spouse. And so in that context, economic family is not available. Currently, the TIFF cannot create household based on the location of dwelling, which would be the mailing address that we're using here, mainly because of the fact that tax data and mailing address are not necessarily an actual location. It could be PO boxes or rural routes. And sorry, I'm just I'm just reading question here. Has there ever been an attempt to approximate the household concept in TIFF? Um, yes, it wasn't successful. It showed to be very different than what we were expecting in terms of count compared to our benchmarks, so we didn't stay to that. Um, but we are kind of looking into options for this redesign that I discussed a little earlier. Um, the impact of comparing data at census family level to data at household level will vary by province. And in this slide, you have an example that compares Ontario and Quebec. And so in Ontario, people living in Ontario are more likely to be in a multi-generational household, sorry, based on the 2021 census than in Quebec. In this context, a household could very likely have higher income at the household level than at the census family. In Quebec, um, it's more likely to be the number of earning in a family is more likely to be comparable to a household because they are more or less equivalent. There's less often situations where you're gonna have, those other related people who are included or other unrelated people included who living in the same dwelling. So that's for that. So if you were to compare data at the household level between Quebec and Ontario, it could show a different scenario than if you were to compare census family level data between the two provinces. And so it's just important to keep that in mind, the difference between units of analysis as you are doing your research and as you might want to combine various data sources together, as it might bring you to having very questionable conclusion to your projects. And so I just talked about two provinces, Ontario and Quebec, but there is so much more at the geographical level available from the TIFF. Maybe you already had access to various levels of geography. So for example, the census subdivision, census division, etc. And so allow me to give you just a little bit of refresher about what the T1 family file includes. The first thing to note is that the T1 family file is based on mailing address. And so it might differ from the actual location of residence of a person. Good example would be, for example, sunbirds who live most of the year in the country, but then part of the year they're outside. But unfortunately, that time of the year aligns with when the CRA wants to send them mail. So they're going to give their out of Canada address for mailing purposes. So that's an example, but there are so many other situations like that. So if I talk about geography, there are two types of geography on the TIFF. They are derived using the postal code associated to the mailing address that I just discussed. So those type of geography or geographical attributes are split between postal areas and census geography. The census geography is based on an official boundary established by the most recent census available at the time of release. There is a change in vintage of geography on TIFF every 5 years or so. So there might be a comparison that is a little more difficult to do between, for example, CMA that changes boundaries or include a fringe that's a little bigger, things like that. So I know that I think it's in 2016, there was a new CA that merged with, I think it's Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu that merged with Montreal, and it kind of created a large increase in population, but yet a decrease in the median income. And so the source of this difference could have been most likely due to the change in boundaries. This is why it's important to note that census geography changes on TIFF every 5 years or so. Also to note that the postal geography is established using the postal code and the mail delivery mode associated with, the postal code is the most, the item that's used to create the census geography. So that's for the census geo. Every 5 years, it changes boundaries. It matches official boundaries of StatCan, and it is based on postal code. Now, the second set of geographical attributes that's available on TIFF is the postal geography. Now, this is derived using, okay, this is where it's derived using the postal code and the mail delivery mode associated with that postal code. It was developed in the earlier years of the TIFF to respond needs for communication. Remember when you were receiving mail? Well, that's what it refers to. These regions do not always align easily with official census geo. While they might be relatively stable over time, the postal code could change based on mailing requirement and have impact on postal geography that we did not document from the TIFF perspective. A very good example of that is, I think it's Whistler in BC, where we saw that the postal code that was actually a rural postal code was split between three postal code that were urban postal code. And so this is where a change in postal code wouldn't have been documented on the TIFF side, and some kind of break-in series could have happened. And here I talk about rural and urban postal code. A rural postal code is usually a postal code, well, not usually, for me, for TIFF, the rural postal code start, the second digit is a 0, while it's not for urban postal code. In the postal geography, more than that is taken into account to distinguish between urban and rural geography. As I mentioned, the delivery mode is one of the main important thing that is used to derive the postal geography. Now, I talked way too much about postal geography because really it's highly recommended to favor census geography when possible. And please note that with the redesign, because this postal geography doesn't align with anything that StatsCan has, it's going to be decommissioned. So this is something to keep in mind if you're planning on asking for data that starting with 2024 data, postal geography will not be available. If you want more information about this, the presentation includes a link to the technical reference guide, which is a large document for the TIFF that explains several concepts. And so feel free to report to that if you need to refresh your memory or refine your understanding. In some of the TIFF product, there's a number associated with the level of geography. So this is a slide where I present census geography. And you see on the right side, there's level of geo 12, 11, 51, etc. This is useful if you have access to what we call standard product. I'll talk about that later. Here it's more just for your information. This is how the relationship between the type of geography and the number is made. And so feel free to refer to that. But what I'm interested in this slide is really more the left side. So on TIFF, the census geo is, well, not on TIFF, but the census geo is broken down into two main streams. The first one is on your left, and it's going to be focusing on the CMA-CA. And on TIFF, we include something that's non-CMA-CA at the provincial level. And this covers the full country. Now, we know that all CMAs are tracted, which means they have a census tract, which is a smaller area. And some CA are also tracted, but not all of them. It depends on the size. For that stream, the lower census, lower geography is actually census tracts. If the second stream starts with provinces and goes down to CSDs. There are multiple types of CSD, including cities, municipalities, town, reserve, etc. And census division, if you combine all census subdivisions together, well, they cover the full country. They are combined to create census division, which are and then combined to create economic regions, and then provinces and territories. You note that there's a little outlier here on the left. This is the federal electoral districts. The TIF does release that information, and it's also created using the postal code, while technically the federal electoral districts are based on the very, very low level of geography that's not even here, which is the dissemination block. So there might be some precision here that is missed because of that. Um, so that's for the census geo. Now, I mentioned that the TIF uses the postal code associated with the mailing address to assign detailed geography. This slide, I'm hoping that this slide helps you understand what this means more concretely in terms of what you'll find in the data. So there are different reasons for the census of population to differ from the TIF population that we release. The first one is that, well, mailing address, as I mentioned a couple of times already, can differ from your usual place of residence. The second is that a postal code can straddle multiple census geos. In this example, I'm showing for census subdivision what it does. So it is for one postal code. The postal code in question is KOC3X1. It could be anything really. The postal code is included in 3 CSDs, but most of the population, like the red box, most of the population is in CSD2. Based on the TIF criteria, because most population is in CSD2, everyone who has that postal code will be in CSD2. No population will be included in CSD1. No, sorry, CSD3. And CSD1 will have some population because another postal code is here covering the left side, but yet it will be missing a piece of population, and so lower counts. Usually we refer to that as coverage. So for example, we would compare the TIF population to the census population by CSDs, and where there are less people that on the TIF than there are on the census, we would talk about under coverage, and more people on the TIF than they are on the census, this would be over coverage. This type of situation, even though I said that KOC3X1 could be any postal code really, well, it does happen more in rural areas. So that kind of covers the census geography on the TIF. Just a reminder, based on postal code, mailing address, and the vintage changes every 5 years. Now, this one I have to go into it, even though I mentioned that postal geography is being decommissioned with the next release. And this is because it's available to you guys. So postal geography was developed years ago when you would receive mail, like I said earlier. Today, internet, emails, I don't know about you, but I barely receive any letters anymore, except for maybe for my car insurance and things like that. Well, so it really lost some values using postal geography. However, it's important that I mention it. It does break down the population based on delivery mode and type of postal code as defined by Canada Post. Since Statistics Canada does not release full 6-digit urban postal code for several years now, there are some limitations around the postal geography. As I mentioned earlier, I strongly encourage you all to use the census geography when possible over the postal geography. The one thing on this slide that I would like to bring your attention to is the urban forward sortation area. So FSAs, forward sortation areas, is something that a lot of users are asking for, but they have to be aware that if they were to use that urban forward sortation area that is available from the TIF, it wouldn't cover the full list of forward sortation areas. It could be for technical reason because the delivery mode is not considered to be urban, or it also could be that the FSA is actually not available for release and then included in other urban areas or other provincial totals depending on the postal code. So this is about as much as I want to say about postal geography. Feel free to add to it if you want to, if you want to ask questions. But now I'm kind of digging into like income concepts, which is kind of the bread and butter of TIFF, even though geography and unit of analysis are really relevant, really relevant. Um, the main characteristics available on TIFF, just a refresher, family type, well, family size, I didn't talk about that much, and geography. Gender and age are also available. Here you see the bread and butter, total income, after-tax income. And so one of the big strengths of TIFF is being able to break down all those income sources into, well, to break down total income into all these income sources. And so all those elements that you see on the slides are actually available on the TIFF dataset. And most of them are available on the web as individual components. Some of them are going to be combined for confidentiality reasons or conceptual reasons. And so to get your after-tax income that is available on TIFF, you would have total income minus your federal income taxes and the provincial income taxes. So that would compose your after-tax income. Now, if you want to have more information about the actual sources of income, then you could break it down between market income and government transfers. And then, etc., go down all that with the turquoise boxes and even the bullet points. Now, I want you to note that these are standard concepts of Statistics Canada. The standard and it follows best practices that have been assigned in 2011 with at a meeting with in Canberra. So there's a best practice that's been put in place so that worldwide comparison was easier. And so we're following that here. Now, you note that capital gains is actually excluded from total income, yet still available from the T1 family file. So aside from, and if you want more information about those standard income concept, here there's a link that you can click on when you get the deck and you can play with that. So data should keep in mind that all that information that we have is collected in a context where for tax requirement and to ensure that people are following tax rules. Yeah. So TIFF data, analyzing TIFF data can be done most of what I just discussed, that is family type, family size, geography, gender, income concept, and tax-related concept. If you wonder what tax-related concepts are available, looking at the main fields on the T1 form and federal schedule would give you a pretty good idea. Most basic statistics can be done on TIFF, which usually would include counts, median, averages, aggregate amounts, percentiles, income ranges, and ratios. But there could be odd ones that someone could request that is not currently available on the web, and they would and would be useful for their project. These kind of requests are doable, but they're usually subject to feasibility study and would be produced based on your information coming from users. Yeah, and so I say here that all the data that we collect is collected on for tax purposes, and just to give you an idea of what this means, well, according to the survey of household spending, a household in 2023 spent about $384 on average on childcare expenses. I don't have the most recent number for 2023, unfortunately, from TIFF, but I'm pretty sure it's more or less in line with that. It was $470 in 2021 on TIFF. And so there are differences between what's being reported from a survey perspective versus what's reported on the T1 family file. The These here I have some examples of topics that could be touched on. So I already covered a little bit sources of income with my last slides, but you could also decide that you're interested in having the number of families by income groups at low levels of geography or even at provincial or territorial and or Canada level. You could be interested in having the median family total income or after-tax income for a specific region. Interested in doing comparison between groups with certain characteristics, for example, lone parent families with two kids compared to couple families with two kids. Um, and then the other thing that you could do with the TIFF is to look at trends on data on low income individuals in low income situation for various levels of geography, various family types and size and age groups. So those are kind of some of the usage that can be done. Um, okay, so I think the questions have been answered in the chat, so I'll just keep going. But feel free to post that again. I'm trying to follow all that, but it's kind of tricky with my settings. So the other thing that I just mentioned the low income situation measure that could be coming from the T1 family file. But I'd like to just take a few moments to go into more details about low income lines. These are a very popular measure that helps people understand how the economic situation of individual in Canada evolve over time, and maybe even for policymakers to adjust some of the policies. The low income measure situation of an individual is assigned by comparing their adjusted family income to 50% of the national median. It's called LIM, low income measure. It could be calculated using various income concepts. So you could have a limb for market income, a limb for employment income, a limb for government transfer. But at StatsCan, we recommend using the limb after tax, which is a better representation of what is available for spending after taxes being paid. A second low income line that I'd like to just talk about is the market basket measure, or MBM. The market basket measure situation is established by comparing disposable income, which is defined by the Canadian Income Survey in collaboration with employment, oh God, ESDC. And I'm probably old here because it might have changed name. Um, so it comparing disposable income to a predetermined basket of goods and services. And so um, this is the second one. The third one is the LICO, the low income cutoff. Um, the LICO identified that the person is in low income if they spent more than 20% of their income on necessities. To determine the necessities, there's a basket that was created in 1992 based on the basket at that time and is adjusted for inflation. Now, I don't know about you, but in 1992, I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have internet. So there's definitely an evolution of the baskets of good that the LICO would not take into account, even though it is adjusted for the cost of living for inflation. Again, I talked about the survey of household spending earlier. Well, the survey of household spending indicate that the percentage of home with a cell phone went from 78.1% in 2010 to 95.7% in 2023. So you could imagine if that becomes a necessity based on the basket of goods, well, it's not the same as when they first built it in 1992. The other thing that was noticed is that, well, television cable in 2010, well, two-thirds of households had a television service via cable in 2010, while in 2013, well, there's less than one-third of households that have television services via cable. Again, I'm saying that because at StatScan, we do recommend using either the MBM or the LIM, staying away from the LICO to create any analysis on low income if possible. Among those three measures, the MBM, as you can see on the slide, is Canada's official poverty line. Unfortunately, TIF component needed for its calculation are currently not available. Eventually, we might find a way to make it work, but for this moment, it's not yet available. So TIFF offers census family low income measure. So the reason why we focus on, you remember earlier I talked about LIM? Well, it's kind of the same method, but usually LIM will be established using households and not census family. Well, you remember that discussion about census family earlier? This is where it becomes important. So uh, over the years, we noticed that the limb rates were higher on TIFF than on other data sources that calculates limb rate using households. However, the trends usually align pretty well between TIFF and these other data sources. Just the levels or the rates are a little higher on TIFF. Um, I think that the example on that slide explains that situation. Okay, and where a grandparent with limited income, this is the example that I'm talking about. So in concrete terms, let's say that Joe lives with his partner Leo. They have two children, but they also live with Joe's parents, Mary and Albert. On TIFF, Mary and Albert, Joe's parent, would be one census family, and Joe, Leo, and the two children would be another census family. However, on other data sources, they would compose one larger household. Well, Mary and Albert have limited pension income, and Joe and Leo are successful investors with high income. Well, on TIFF, Mary and Albert would likely be more low income, and um, and Joe and Leo would actually probably be out of low income. As if they were a household, well, it's more likely that Mary and Albert would actually be not in low income. So you can see here how it could make a difference depending on the level of income of family members. Could make a difference if you're looking at households or not. Yeah, we are doing a lot of. So someone is posting in the chat that that DMBM would be really, really, really helpful on TIFF. Oh yeah, there are lots of studies that have been well, not lots. I'm aware of two studies that I reviewed where they actually tried to use the T1 family file data to create MBM. There are major challenges with that. One of them is we don't know if a person is a renter or owner. The childcare expenses have limited, as I mentioned earlier, are not necessarily in line with what is currently being spent. And there's also the idea that the MBM has very specific areas that are difficult to establish using the TIFF. So the areas that they have, I want to say is based on DB, dissemination block or dissemination area, but on TIFF, this is not something that's available or that is not as high a quality as we would like it to be. So we can't really create the MBM regions, and we can't really replicate MBM rates. For those reasons and more, it's been very difficult, but there are attempts to create the MBM. So I really cross my fingers because that's something that I really want to see happening before I retire, that we get that in the database eventually. Thanks for that question. Yeah, if you are interested in more information about differences between the after-tax low income and different sources, here you have a link to the comparison of between the T1 family file and the 2016 census of population. Okay. So earlier I talked about typical usage of TIFF. This slides includes other example, but do not cover the full spectrum. Um, Again, I think I mentioned it earlier. What I'd like you to remember is that there are more concepts available on TIFF than what is being systematically released. If you are interested in those topics, I invite you to consult the tax forms of your years of interest and contact the team with line numbers and tax-related concept required, and the team will assess the feasibility. I'll talk a bit more about these contacting team and custom requests in a few slides. Um, Most recent, so this slide spent time describing a bit what is available on the web from, or not even on the web, that is available from TIFF, so TIFF annual releases. So there are two releases yearly on TIFF. In a usual year, there are two releases from TIFF. The first release takes usually place in the winter, and the second would take place in the summer. Now, the second one is what we call final, and the first one is what we call preliminary. It's just because of the vintage of the tax data that's being used for that. The winter release, which is on the very right side of things, yep, medical expenses would be missed in the MBM. Um, so the preliminary the data that's released in the winter, right side of the screen, covers only tax filers and covers only individuals. It does address a fewer topics than the final release, which is we talk about tax filer data, charitable donation, again referring to tax deductible charitable donations, RSP contributions, and wages, salaries, and commission. The summary release includes a larger spectrum of information by including family information, detailed income sources, and various tax credits. If you are interested in more information about that, you can always use the links that are provided in this slide, where the left is for the release that's more detailed, the right is for the release that's a little more limited. And for the final release, there are 37 tables. You'll see at the end of the presentation or an appendix. I'm not going to go through them. In the appendix to this deck, there is a list of everything that's been released from the TIFF. Okay, the next few slides, I will present a few interesting facts that can be drawn from the TIFF data. Those were released with 2023 data. That's the most recent data that's available just yet. Um, Again, this first slide is about the summer release or the final release. We can say that average family income edged down as most income sources decreased, except for investment income, which increased. Families where at least one senior, those families fare a little better than the younger families. And proportionally, more couple family benefited from the multi-generational home renovation than credits than other family type. We added it there because that was kind of a new credit that the government put in place in 2023. So we thought it was interesting to actually understand better how Canadians were using that credit. This slide, we talk about RSP contribution. Even though usually in previous releases, in web tables, we include only RSP contribution. In this release, in the analytical part of the release, we did do a look at the TFSAs, the RSPs, also FHSA, but there were not enough data at that time for FHSA. FHSA was the first year. And so here we can see that, well, most people are contributing only to an RSP or only to an TFSAs, but about 2.5 million people would contribute to both and up to the maximum amount. So that was kind of really interesting for us when we saw that information. Charitable donation. Again, this is charitable donation that is deductible. So we are missing part of charitable donation. So for example, if you give a toonie to your grocery store, or a toonie is probably not enough those days. I'm kind of saying my age here, but if you give $5, $10 at the grocery store, then you know that this wouldn't be included in the data. But so what we see is that there was a decrease in 2022, but then an increase in 2023. People with less than $60,000 were giving less than in previous year. Why $60,000? This was how TIFF presented the data with very rigid income groups, which we're planning on changing in the future. But so that's the kind of things that we were able to say. Again, this I think has been repeated for several years now. 65 years old are overrepresented amongst donors. So that's something that we were able to say with that data. Here's an interesting, so that kind of covers everything that I wanted to talk about for TIFF precisely. So we talked about geography, we talked about sources of information, sources of income, low income lines, population. And so you can review that if you feel like this would be a good refresher, or you can ask question at the end if you want. Now, let's just discuss about the various income data sources that are available at Statistics Canada. This is to help you understand better the differences between the various sources of information that you might see and you might be exposed to, and understand how they interact to each other. Um, so here you see the first item is comparing size of sample size. Uh, you would use the sample size to know if you want something very detailed. A survey might not be able to provide you with that. So, for example, if you want to know lone parent family where the oldest person is 65 and over and lives in Winnipeg, well, might be difficult to have with the Canadian Income Survey because it's a sample, but with TIFF or the census, you would be able to get that. Now, the LAD, here is the third or fourth column or third income source. The LAD is actually a subsample of TIFF. So in terms of content, they pretty much align very well. The main difference is that the LAD has longitudinal aspect and is available in the RDCs, while the TIFF is not available in the RDCs and is a full census of all tax filers and their dependent. So usually characteristics from the TIFF are the same as for the LAD, except for the size of the dataset. The second point to think about when you want to choose an income data source is, well, what kind of geography is available from that data source? Census and TIFF have census geography and FSAs. TIFF has a little more postal geography than the census, and the CIS only has census geography. And that's mainly because of sample size issues. It cannot go lower than certain level of census geography. Data sources, most of them are using text data. This Canadian Income Survey obviously is using a survey, and the census is also collecting data through a survey. The universe is slightly different depending on the data sources that you are looking at. The census focuses on all individuals living in Canada based on their principal residence. TIFF and LAD are based on mailing address and on tax data. And since the Canadian Income Survey is all individual living in provinces, and now they're releasing territory data. The other aspect that you want to think about when you decide which data source you want to look at is, well, what kind of unit of analysis is available. Here you have household, economic family, census family, and individual in the census, and on the Canadian Income Survey. Well, in TIFF and LAD, census family and individual is available. On LAD, it's individual plus because you have at the record level, you are able to say what the partner income is or what the census family is. But I mean, it's doable at the TIFF level too. It's just not as easily available. Um, there's a very important thing to consider when you decide which data source to use, and that's the social characteristics. So if you want to know if a person is disabled, well, depending on the concept that you're targeting, obviously, the census might be the best source of information and would be based on the sample. Now, if you want to know in terms of age group, the age of income by age group, well, the TIFF would be a pretty good source, especially if you want to break it down in 5-year span. The TIFF would probably be a better source. Age is not that is available on TIFF, and you can go into very low levels of geography. If you were to look for MBM data, the census or the CIS would be the best sources of information. The frequency is where you will choose the TIFF over the census. So TIFF is annual, census is every 5 years. So that's what to consider. In terms of time frame, the census is available every 5 years, so that from 1970 to 2021, 2026 is soon to be released. Well, at least a few data set or data points are to be released relatively shortly, I'm expecting, before the end of the year, most likely. The TIFF and LAD currently are available for 1982 to 2023, and the Canadian Income Survey, or CIS, was released for 2024 data in, I want to say, May 2026. Now, on this slide, well, at StatsCan, there's another data source that's available that I didn't really include here, but that would be available for linkage purposes if ever this is something that you want to entertain. This is the administrative personal income master file. Again, I didn't include it here because of the limited usage of that file. Yeah, okay. So someone is asking if we can break down what type of characteristic is available from TIFF outside of age and family size and family type. We do have some indicators about disability tax credit, but when we compared it with what the CRA released, we seem to be misaligned. And we have less people who are younger, more people who are older, who technically would have a disability tax credit certificate. Now, there's also the consideration of whether or not this disability certificate is valid and or approved by the CRA. So we do have a little bit of information, but again, there are lots of caveats around that. The TIF doesn't have occupation, unfortunately. We haven't found a way to get that information other than linking, for example, to the census, and that would be once every 5 years. It does include the industry, the main industries, based on the income that you're getting from that industry at the six-digit level. That's for more recent year. Earlier, it was I think 3-digit level, but the industry is available at the on the TIFF, usually released at the 2-digit level. We did release wage tables at the industry level. I think those I want to say they start with 2017 data and go up to 2023. And so in that table, you would see wages and salaries. I think there's something about total income in there. And you would be able to break it down by industry at the 2-digit level. There's a note about linking TIFF data with IRCC. This is something that I'm planning on doing with the redesign. We'll see how far we can get with that. It wouldn't be that difficult because the IRCC file is already linked to tax data for the immigration database that exists at Statistics Canada. So there's a linkage between tax data and immigration data to know, to be able to assess the income of immigrants, see how they do compare to Canadian born or depending on their citizenship and the length of stay in Canada. So that's something that definitely exists. The longitudinal immigration database, yeah, that's what the person said. Now, you know how here I talk about the LAD. On the LAD, there's a linkage that's been done with the IRCC file. And so on the LAD in the RDCs, you would have access to knowing whether a person is immigrant or not, and when they arrived in Canada. I believe that we have the citizenship and the year of landing. And so that would be available in the LAD. The LAD is also available for custom requests, but there's very limited capacity in that sense. So I would probably recommend using the RDC if you have a project that can be approved. Oh, thanks, Tristan, for pointing to LIP data. That's kind of fun. I'll look at that later. Okay, so that's for the income sources. Yeah. So the TIFF is usually available on the web. Well, it's not usually. The TIFF is available on the web, but generally from 2000 to 2023 and at the CMA level. CA data is available starting in 2007. But for the next few slides, I'll talk about how to access TIFF data. I believe that as a CDP users, you might have other means to access the TIFF data, but I didn't touch that. I'm not aware of how it works, so I prefer staying away with that, but I'm sure Mike or someone from CDP can actually help you with that. Um, Here, user can access TIFF data through the web for free. Some fees apply to custom requests, and record linkage projects would be done on a cost recovery basis. And here I remember when I was in university in probably 2000, the data on StatsCan website wasn't free. You had to download CanSIM tables, and for some of them, you had to pay a fee. So now it's not the case anymore. Thank God, we're evolving. Um, so as I mentioned earlier, TIFF data is available for most tables from 2000 to 2023, with this census agglomeration data being available starting in 2007. And as I mentioned earlier in this presentation or this discussion, um, there is a change in census geo vintage over the years. So this is something to keep in mind as you're comparing 2 years, especially for census years. Um, Let me just see if I want to say something else here. Yeah, I think that covers it. I included most popular table, link to most popular tables in this slide, source of family income by family type. So you would be able to say how much lone parent family receives CCB income, for example. How many families receive CCB income? And income of men and women is also something else that you could look at. These are links to actual visualization tool. So that's kind of really fun. Let me go to the next slide. If you were to look for TIFF data in web table, um, these are predefined content. You would have to go into the data option of the StatsCan website, search for tables. If you were to include TIFF in the keyword, oh, sorry, if you were to include TIFF in the keywords, you would see two items popping up in the Survey of Statistical Program area. And those are the two releases that I referred to earlier, which is the final release or the summer release, annual income estimates for census families and individuals, and the winter release, which is the prelim data, income, and financial data of individual preliminary T1 family file. So that's how you would be able to access the web tables or find easily the web tables from TIFF. I believe that there might be a few foreign tables in there that would include TIFF data. I think education has one, but most of those tables would be related to TIFF data. And once you have that, then you would be clicking on the table that you're interested in. And here you will have what we call the initial view. So it's by default, the table will show that. And that applies to all tables that you will find on our website. But the initial view might not contain all that's available from the table itself. And if you want to change that, there's a few options. You can click on customize table, and here you have choice for geography and reference periods, but other table will have other choices. If you want to see everything that's available from that one table, I invite you to click on add remove data. That would bring you to a more detailed list of what is available, and then you can pick and choose what you really want to see on the screen. There's also the download option where you can select various types of files that you would be able to download and use in various systems. Yeah, I think that covers the web table. There are two visualizations. This word is really, really hard to say. Two visualization tools that are available from TIFF. One looks at the family information, and the other one looks at the individual data. And this is where I was telling you, well, you could look at, I can't click on this slide because it's not interactive, but you could click here on the arrow and pick lone parent family. And then the source of total income would be broken down here. So you would see how much government transfer this family would get. And so here you have the breakdown that's more visual. So the visualization tools can be somewhat interesting. Here we keep a 20-year historical series in this file of the median family income in Canada. Um, yep. And this is the visualization tool that's for individual. Um, Now, these are kind of limited information, CMA level. It could be detailed income sources, but it's very limited in terms of geography. If you are interested in having either lower geography or a longer time period than what's available on the internet, most tables on the standard table on the web, sorry, are also available in standard tables for various levels of geography that I presented earlier. The only caveat here is that the CSD data or the census subdivision data is only available starting with 2019 data. Turnaround time to get these tables is fairly quick. So that's one other way of getting the data. So web table, standard tables, you would need to contact StatsCan to get that. Another way to get the data is to order custom tabulation. These are more complex. It's for someone who knows what they are looking for in terms of they have a goal to get data tabulated. They just don't know how to get that. So there would be exchanges between StatsCan and the users, and mock table would be built so that we can agree on what is contained in that table. It's really very user-defined tables. The cost is usually higher, as you might imagine, that it requires a lot more work on our side, and it becomes more expensive as the complexity and the number of years increase. The turnaround time for the delivery of the custom tables vary drastically depending on the complexity and the number of years. Unfortunately, with the redesign, we're currently really limited in terms of amount of custom tabulation that we can do. Um, we hope that this situation normalizes when the redesign is complete, but various factors are out of our control might impact the capacity in the future. So this is available, but there might be limitations into how accessible it is. One thing that some of you might be interested in is accessing data in the research data center. This slide talks about or give links to information about how to do that. Very tight and controlled environment. And the project needs to be approved by Statistics Canada before someone is allowed to use the files that is in the RDC. And there are fees associated to having a seat in the RDCs, except for some partnership with university, I believe, and other federal agencies. So all that can be discussed with people at the data service centers. They can assist data users in various projects, and it could be a main door for a data user with several requests or someone who's unsure of what source of information to use for their project. These are the information that can be used to contact them. This is the interesting slide for me because this is exactly what I'm in the middle of. And this is the redesign. So the team has been working very hard over the last, I think we started in February, I want to say February 2025, actually, discussing this and planning for this. Now we have some prototype that we're playing with. It's a major redesign that will ensure that the TIFF continues to exist. It does have an impact on some of the timelines. While the TIFF currently uses T1 tax data, CCB file, and T4 slips, this redesign will allow to use additional slips and other data sources. I discussed earlier about we discussed the IRCC file, so that's something that we'd like to bring on to the TIFF, what we call the TIFF Plus or the TIFF redesign. Also, there will be an improvement to the geographical process that's in place. And the release product available free on the web should include a larger list of geographical attributes and a higher precision. We changed the methodology behind the way we assign census geography for most of population. There's no gains without loss. Unfortunately, there are some things that will be discontinued. I discussed the postal geography earlier. There will be a little bit more limitation in terms of information that's available from the TIF, but know that we are focusing on tax related and a very large list of variables that will be available in the T1 family file. The regular release will also be a little earlier. So we talk about the 4 months earlier, depending on if you're looking at the final release or the winter release. It's 4 months earlier or at the same time, and a big revamping of product, which we are terminating the web tables and we're going to be starting a new sets of tables. Um, this is the impact of a release. We did a pause for 2024 data, so we didn't release 2024 TIF data. Sorry, I'm gonna respond that question about postal code aggregation in a minute. I'm just gonna go through that slide and then I'll go to that question. So the redesign, yeah, we did a pause for 2024, so it wasn't released as the usual timelines, which would have been the summer. We are planning on releasing the 2023, 2024, and 2025 data in winter 2027. The new sets of table will include 2023 to 2025. As I mentioned earlier, more census geography. So we're planning on having CSGs and province and the CMA and province available. There were duplications of information in the data table, so we're going to try to streamline that to make it easier for you guys to access the data. And the DA of higher quality than what the TIF currently has will be available for custom requests more easily. In their regular year, the release should have happened still in the winter for the reference year before a year and a half before, I guess. So for example, for 2026 data, we should be releasing that in winter 2028. And we'll still include family and detailed income source. The TIF is committed to continually improving the product to meet the data needs of Canadians. So if ever you have things that you're wondering if it's possible, please let me know. Now I will answer that question. Will custom requests still be available using postal code aggregations? It is currently available. It will continue to be available. One of the things that the TIF really want to have is having this ability to have user-defined geography. In addition to having postal code aggregation, we will be able to have DA aggregation. Census tract data, we're looking into adding it to the web tables. I don't know if that's going to be possible. It's just there's some technical limitation on our side that kind of prevents us from doing that. So we're looking into option at this point. No, the new ADAs, this is really just a census concept that allow them to release at the DA level more easily. So I don't think that well, at this point, we're not planning on having ADAs. And this could be a custom request for sure. Okay, the tricky question. Thanks, Tristan. When we say winter 2027, what is the ballpark month? Um, yeah, we say winter 2027 because there are some uncertainty around that. I'd say it's likely going to be late winter 2027 based on what I see right now. We do have timelines to respect because we are providing the CIS and the census of population, some income data. So we are bound delivering some 2025 data to those projects very early. So it's likely it's going to be winter, but I'm expecting it to be late winter. Okay. I'm not sure how the CDP will be releasing TIF data in the future. I think this is something that will need to be discussed as we are more clear about what it's going to look like in terms of outputs. Date in the winter for the data release. Yeah. Again, I'd say probably late winter 2027. I don't have more precise information at this point. So it's fair to say that it's not going to be before March 2027. Yeah. And again, this is a tentative date. We are not in a position, like we haven't received 2025 data yet anyways. So I don't know when that's going to be in house. Well, I know when it's going to be in house, but I don't know when it's going to be really ready for release. We are working on 2023 and 2024 data at this point. And so we'll see how that goes with the current system and things in place. Way. So what's great about census geography is that it's going to be more comparable to all data sources and clearer probably. Urban FSA is definitely an option in some areas, but in some other areas, not so much. Um, okay, yeah. So Peter Marriott says that FSAs are better understood than stands in for neighborhood than the standard census geography for urban FSAs, especially in Vancouver, where there are some kind of characteristics for various areas of the downtown Vancouver. Yeah. Okay, good. Postal code will remain available. It's just it's not going to be available by default. It will be more custom requests. We are changing our tool. Well, we are hoping to change our tool to do custom requests, which hopefully will simplify some of the custom requests, but might make it more difficult for very complex requests. I mean, when I refer to winter 2027, funny things, I do refer to 2026, 2027. So March 2027 would be some kind of idea. And I say it's a funny thing because initially when we were building our documentation, we were talking about winter 2026 and 2027. But yet when you look at, for example, community centers with their calendar, the fall 2026 would be October to December 2026, and winter 2027 would be the first months of 2027. So that's what I'm referring to. Yeah. And the future, we're hoping that the release continue to take place in the winter. So basically, we're trying to get this new calendar in place for the next release, which would be releasing 2023, 2024, and 2025 data. Okay, so I'm answering question in the chat. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask question live, I'm happy to take them too. Happy to continue taking questions through the chats if need be.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dominic, for the presentation. And it was really interactive. And I see that questions are still coming. So please add your questions and or unmute your devices and ask your question. While you're adding your questions, I will share with you the upcoming webinars, the page on CDP website. And this webinar is recorded, and the recording and the presentation slides will be posted on the webinar page in the coming days. I think we can stop recording. Looks like that's end of the webinar.